For our friends at PRINZ that have just joined us, thank you for doing so. You're in for a bit of a treat. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to chat with Paul Feldwick, the author of Why Does The Pedlar Sing? This book was recommended to me by my friend and colleague Max Burt earlier this year. I've read it twice. I reread it. I went on holiday with my partner a couple of weeks ago, and she kept nagging me for scribbling in the book with so much interest. I want to capture that today as we traverse all the cool things in the book that relate to PR, brands, and fame. And on that note, Paul, thanks for joining us. You've touched on something that, connected with me when I read the book, and as a PR practitioner, I've been doing, what I do for a long time, nearly quarter of a century. And a big chunk of my life, and indeed many PR professionals' lives, is that intersection between business, and the fourth estate. And I was very keen to get your take, as I'm sure people watching will also want to know, what you see the relationship between fame and media looking like, and the relationship between PR and advertising.
Wow. Well, there's some big questions there. Our notions of fame have a lot to do with the development of media and also the development of advertising and the development of media and the development of, I suppose, PR as well, actually, have historically, they've all grown together. I guess this is partly why Barnum is an interesting and sort of important figure, because Barnum was born in 1810. And so as he grew up and as he became a young man, say we're getting to about the 1830s, 1840s, it's coinciding with an absolute explosion in mass communications. Now, it may not seem much by today's standards, but it's a huge leap forward because you suddenly have newspapers which are accessible to the masses. I mean, obviously, newspapers have been around for a while, but they were expensive, and now you have mass newspapers. You also have huge improvements in communications with railroads opening up the United States, steamboats. Suddenly, um, what Barnum does is not in itself absolutely new, but he can do it on a much bigger scale simply because he can do it across the whole of the United States. And indeed, he's soon able to do it across large parts of the world. Barnum was almost as famous in the UK as he was in the US, and he traveled to the UK frequently. So, this was the beginnings of being able to create fame on a global scale. And what is interesting about what Barnum does is that something like the Jenny Lind tour, where he created this huge fame for the rather modestly talented soprano Jenny Lind across the whole of the States, and created a kind of hysteria, which I could only actually compare probably to the recent Taylor Swift tour, but by using many of
Yeah.
the same techniques, to be honest. Um, you know, by hiring the biggest venues, by charging enormous amounts for the tickets, by getting people to pay over the odds for the tickets, by selling loads and loads of merchandise, by getting Jenny Lind talked about in all the newspapers, by continually feeding them with stories that were so interesting that they just had to publish them. These are all the things that Barnum was practiced at doing. And as I say, they weren't entirely new, and Barnum himself admitted that. But what was new was doing them at this massive scale. And I think as obviously technology has given us successive waves of mass media since then, as it's gone on into radio, as it's gone on into television, as it's gone on now into the internet, all these things have been ways of amplifying fame. So without those media, clearly, fame on the scale that we imagine it wouldn't have happened and couldn't happen. So they're intimately linked.
And I mean, we're talking about early iterations of the PR industry. And of course, it's much bigger than just landing coverage in the news, but it has always been and will continue to be a pretty fundamental tenet of how to build brands and build fame. So, what role then for media as a conduit to achieve fame, given just some of the pressures that have been pressing down on mainstream media, legacy media. You talk, for instance, in your chapter about David Beckham and his relationship with the media. I think the infamous example you give is the haircut. Was it a
Yeah.
considered act? Whatever it was, it prompts
Yeah.
media coverage, which fuels the brand, the Beckham brand. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about how to achieve fame through the lens of media, but against the backdrop of media landscape that's fracturing.
Well, Beckham is and continues to be an interesting example because, I mean, Beckham is probably, I mean, I read recently that by some accounts, David Beckham is possibly the best known person in the world. I mean, throughout areas where they won't have heard who the Prime Minister of the British Isles or the President of the United States are, they'll know who David Beckham is. That's rather a remarkable thing, considering that at the end of the day, he was a very talented footballer for a few years, and that was about it, really. And he married a sort of moderately successful pop star who's also continuing to be in the news. So Brand Beckham is a spectacular example of how to play the game. Your example of the haircut that you mentioned, it's kind of you know part of the interest of that, part of what gets the coverage is the ambiguity about it, that
Mm,
people argue about it. Beckham arrives one day with this, his head completely shaved.
mm,
And all sorts of theories pop up as to why he's done this. Is it some sort of self-mortification because he screwed up in that match where he got the red card? Is it fatherhood? Is it new maturity? So, of course, fantastic amount of stuff for people to argue about. The main thing is that they're arguing about it, and in a way, it's much more powerful simply because nobody really knows. And then Posh Spice puts out this story in her autobiography where she says, actually, it wasn't any of those things. It was just my hairdresser said, "Oh, David, I think you ought to have it all off," and he did. Now, is she being absolutely straight? Who knows? I mean, yeah, I'll take it at face value, but you don't have to because, she is also, and her autobiography itself is all part of that game, which is keeping that pot stirring. So things like his hairdo, his sarong, they're kind of utterly trivial in themselves. But once you've achieved a certain level of fame, they become like front page news stories simply because he's David Beckham and people will argue about them. So there is this wonderful sort of interplay between the media and the brand Beckham. Not only does he get money for it, but his face is plastered around everywhere. So everybody gets to think he's even more famous and even more important and even more remarkable than he is. And so there's a wonderful sort of, I think so much of fame depends on these kind of positive feedback loops where everybody is getting some benefit from it.
Let's talk about the feedback loop then, because I think in chapter, I know I've got this, yeah, right. You talk in chapter 14 of Why Does the Pedlar Sing about blowing shit up, and you talk about going to Cannes. We touched on this. I remember you said 2015. I went in 2016, and I've been just the once. I suspect I will not be going back. Once was enough. So
Yeah,
so
that's sort of my feeling.
yeah. So ad agencies of which you were a part produce work. The best work, the most creatively led work often gets submitted into awards. If they win those awards, they would then PR the awards, generating voluminous amounts of press coverage, equaling fame, and around goes the conveyor belt. So I think chapter 14, blowing shit up, you talk about maybe finding a way through that and deconstructing what awards mean and that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of campaign entries, winning, etc., etc. So tell us a little bit about that, and then the kicker. What does the advertising industry need to be doing more of or less of to become better?
Thank you. I mean, this is a kind of a can of worms in a way, and it could be quite complicated to explain, but I'll have a go. I mean, one of the media developments of the 1970s was television went from black and white to color. And at the same time, the screens got bigger, the quality got bigger. And, I think this provided an incentive. Also, advertising agencies were making loads of money because the commission system was still going. This provided a nice environment in which agencies started to imagine TV commercials on a grander scale and putting much more production values into them. So there was this sort of golden age of really entertaining high production values TV commercials that were in many cases directed by people who went on to become very famous film directors like Ridley Scott, Hugh Hudson, David Putnam, etc., etc. That once agencies started winning those top awards at Cannes, this became increasingly important to the agencies. And what I think has happened since then, and it's happened fairly gradually, but over a number of decades, is that for so many agencies, winning awards has become much more important than actually producing advertising that is effective. Now, that sounds crazy, but it is in the nature of things that if that's what matters to agencies. So, I mean, I got to a point where I was working for an agency where we DDB, where we were actually mandated from the top that one of our absolute goals was to win awards. The two goals were make your financials and win awards.
Sure.
And there was nothing in there about make advertising that actually helps the client or make advertising that works. And that's how it had become screwed up. So I think what has happened over the years, and meanwhile, Cannes, another part of the feedback loop, the Cannes Festival, because it becomes more important, it grows, it becomes bigger, and it's run by some pretty smart people who know how to turn this into a big money making business. So they invent more and more categories. They spread it beyond film and they bring in press and they bring in the internet and they bring in everything you can
Yeah.
possibly think of and a few more things beside as well. And this is even before we've got onto the whole thing about purpose, which I probably haven't got time to go into now. But I mean, so I worry that
Mm.
progressively what awards stand for is some sort of echo chamber where advertising agencies are writing ads to appeal to other people in advertising agencies, not writing ads that actually appeal to the public, and not writing ads that actually sell stuff. Now, those are three categories that can overlap, but also don't have to, you know. And increasingly, my worry is that they don't. So my skepticism about something like Cannes is that creativity, as defined in the terms of what will win awards, which, to be honest, is probably the default definition if people are really pushed to it, is very dangerous because that type of creativity is what's fashionable, what's cool, what's different, what's edgy. Um, and those things very often become quite different from what's actually popular. What will the public understand? What will the public enjoy? What will the public connect with and talk about and find entertaining? And so the bottom line of Why Does the Peddler Sing is if the advertising industry wants to get back on a solid foundation, one thing we need to do is redefine creativity where I think it should always have been, which is about using those techniques of artistry and craft and imagination to produce stuff that is popular and entertaining in the same way that David Beckham or Taylor Swift or the Marvel franchise or James Bond or name anything that is hugely popular and famous and entertaining because that is how brands work too. There's always been this parallel between celebrities, entertainment, and brands, which the ad industry itself was never quite honest enough about.
Do you think that cocktail of celebrities, brand, fame, is it as big as it has ever been, or is there still more room to go in terms of its dominance on popular culture in the world that we live in?
So I feel those things are always going to go together because they kind of work the same way. I mean, the Taylor Swift tour is an interesting phenomenon. You know, it's not so much about brands, but it's easy to link it to brands if you want to. On the whole, Taylor Swift is smart enough, as I understand it, to realize that probably brands need her more than she needs them. And so she doesn't really have to get into, endorsing stuff, but she can. I mean, certainly, a lot of these present day superstars, people like, Beyonce or Rihanna, now realize that they can monetize what they're doing, not just by endorsing other people's brands, but by starting their own brands. And those can be, fairly successful. In fact, you don't even have to be a sort of superstar of that level. You could be someone like, Kylie Jenner, who is really just a reality TV star, and you can start a brand of makeup that makes you, the youngest so-called self-made billionaire ever. So, I mean, you're seeing a slight shift in the balance of power, but that link between, I am a celebrity, I am an entertainer, and I actually can sell stuff. The logic behind that is as powerful as it's ever been, ever since, loads of Jenny Lind merchandise was sold on the back of the Jenny Lind tour, or indeed back to the days when the medieval peddler would go round from house to house singing songs and telling jokes in order to sell more ribbons and stockings or whatever he had to sell.
You must see some parallels between P.T. Barnum, the showmanship, the with Trump, and I'm sure you've thought long and hard about that. Tell us, share with us some of your reflections about the Trump brand and what it owes to fame.
Trump is certainly a showman. His whole shtick is he was a property developer, and part of his success as a property developer was because of his showmanship. And he then became a reality TV star, which of course used the media in a different way and entertainment in a different way to explode his reputation, his fame even further. And people were joking years ago about, he could become president of the United States, ho, ho, ho. But surprise, surprise, he has become president of the United States. His whole shtick is showmanship. But he understands somehow intuitively, I think, all the tricks of the trade. He understands that it's about keeping things simple. It's about sound bites. It's about slogans. Make America great again. Whether you love it or hate it, it has everything that a great slogan needs. It's got that wonderful sort of rhythm and assonance to it and means just about enough to sort of appeal to the emotions without quite meaning enough to make any appeal to the brain. But, and again, this is also not just in the tradition of what I'm calling showmanship. This is also totally, of course, in the tradition of PR, as they were developed by the giants of PR like Walter Lippmann or Edward Bernays, who always made the point much more clearly, I think, than their advertising contemporaries ever did. They said, the secret of moving public opinion is don't give them facts, don't make it complicated. You give them simple ideas, you give them images, you give them slogans, and you keep everything very simple. And whether you like that or not, that is what works, and that is what Trump does.
Mhm.
And that is the secret of his success. That something like MAGA, Make America Great Again, is a great slogan. I mean, everybody makes fun of Trump's hair, but it's kind of deliberate. that he always looks the same. He is his own, distinct brand image in that sense. He has the hair, he has the tie, he's always wearing the same clothes. He is a brand, and I think probably instinctively he understands something very important about how to make that work.
I've been thinking about our first chat actually, and the provenance, the early start that the PR industry got. You mentioned Edward Bernays. I'm paraphrasing here, but I think he's reported to have said something. He's paraphrasing in turn Napoleon, who famously said, "Circumstance, I create circumstance."
Exactly.
You
I mean,
get the
that's
gist,
very
right?
well
So,
put.
yeah,
I
and
mean,
this.
what Bernays did is he creates the reality. He creates the truth. He would never have seen it as disguising truth because he said, there's no such thing as absolute truth. It's all relative. So, and I think there's a lot of that's true, basically. I believe that, whether you like it or not, that is the case. It's the social construction of reality that the world that we share is largely created by the language we use, the images that we share, etc. That's why public relations is so powerful. It creates those meanings, it creates those structures. It's so that transform the world that people are in so that you get them to do what you want them to do without them ever even realizing that they've been persuaded. And that is why PR is in some ways, has always been rather more sophisticated than advertising. Because the advertising people for 120 years have been banging on about we're just honest salesmen who tell you why this product is better than that product. Actually, it's never really been about that, but they like to pretend it was. The PR guys have been going, actually, if you really want to change the world, this is how you do it. And you don't want to make it too obvious because then people will push back.
Mm. I would like to say, Paul, I would hope we get to chat in 12 months' time or so. What does the next year for you on the professional front look like?
Well, it's not so busy as it used to be. I mean, I shall continue to talk, lecture, maybe travel a bit, and possibly I'll find the idea for another book. This is still not a bad book, actually. There's a chapter on PR in this one,
All
and it's
right,
still in print. So if anybody wants to refer back to the Anatomy of Humbug, that still stands up pretty well, to be honest.
consider it done. Paul, on that note, thank you so much for your time. And from our friends at PRINZ, we wish you all the best. Thanks so much.
Andy, thanks very much. I hope it works for you. Bye.